October 14th, Washougal City Council workshop meeting. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger.
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee.
Say here.
Here.
Councilmember Plinsky.
Thank you.
Councilmember Shoemaker.
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel.
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay. Councilmember Freeman.
Here.
Okay, seeing that we don't have any members of the public present currently, we will bypass public comments and go right into our Public Works Cost of Service update. Karen, good evening.
Good evening. Just going to find the presentation here. Pull it up.
Is it in the Dropbox?
Is it City of Washougal Water and Sewer Rate Study final results?
There it is. Okay.
Here we go.
Yep, we ready?
Full view.
Okay, now we're ready to go. Okay, so I just wanted to give a brief recap of kind of where we were at the beginning of the study when we were presenting results, kind of going through the recap of the revenue requirement policy direction that for the water utility, there would be 3% overall annual increases for about a cumulative 16% over the study period. And for sewer, no increases until 2017 and 18, where they'd be 2%. So that's just a recap of where we first were with the direction on revenue requirements before then moving into cost of service and how we would collect those revenues from the different customer classes. At the September meeting, we gave some preliminary results on the cost of service analysis. The recap of those findings there were that we did determine that there were subsidies between customers in both the water and sewer utilities, and that a kind of a redistribution of your cost recovery and modifications to your rate structure would be warranted to provide more equitable rate structures and meet your current pricing goals. That there would be some significant near-term increases to some of the customers if we were to have recommended moving to full cost of service right away, and so we developed some phase-in strategy options for you to see. And then bringing forth for the final is the last thing we had to complete after the last presentation was the physical audit of the billing system, making sure that all the customers were classified correctly as to being single-family residential, commercial, large commercial, and multifamily. That was completed. That did result in some minor shifts between customer classes. There was no overall impact to the single-family residential class or multifamily class strategy, and then some slight modifications between the regular commercial and large commercial class. So we'll look at those results today. For the water utility, just looking quickly at the types of things that we look at for the customer class distributions and what the findings are, is we look at the annual average usage for your customer classes and their winter period usage and summer period usage to try to determine differences in the customer classes. And so kind of the area I have highlighted here is a key factor in differentiating rates, which is the peak ratio, how much more water your customers use in the summer than they do on an average annual basis. Just some of those highlights that warrant separation of classes are single-family residential have relatively low average annual usage, but they place a high peak on your system in the summertime. Multifamily has lower use per unit than your single-family residential and has very low peak demands on the system. Your commercial customers have higher usage but pretty varied depending on the type of business. As a group, they exhibit peaks similar to your single-family residential. And then the large commercial has very large volume of water usage on an annual basis, but very low peaking on your system. And another thing that we had noted for potential future study is separating out from that commercial class, looking at a separation of irrigation accounts, municipal parks, et cetera, pulling that out from the commercial classes as maybe an idea for a future look. Just another way of looking at this is we look at the unit cost of service for each of your customer classes. That's taking the total revenues derived by the customer classes divided by their usage to look at the unit costs. And what we're showing up here in comparison from the distribution on your current rates to the cost of service rates for 2014 is what we used as our baseline for putting together a phase-in strategy. So what we've noticed here for multifamily is that their usage patterns are not appropriately recognized from an equity standpoint in your current declining block rate structure. You can see up there, 433 is their existing unit cost that they're paying compared to the cost of service of 286. On the other hand, that another highlight here is the large commercial usage patterns, while recognized in the declining block, which gives them a lower unit cost the more water usage they use, recognizes that constant use pattern, but just needs some adjustments to recover the full share of costs there.
Pardon me, before you leave that slide, I'm having trouble reconciling the information we got last time that 61% of residential users are going to see a decrease next year.
Yes, that's true. We still have that chart in here, and I will show that. So what this is the class as a whole. So for single-family residential, for example, you can see that they're at the 5.43 currently, and as a class need to go to a unit cost of 567. That represents that 3% overall system-wide increase for the water utility. Within the classes, that's where we'll see that split. So kind of noting here, the top chart is the preliminary phase-in strategy that we discussed last time I was here, and that again shows the single-family residential as a group with 3% overall increases. Multifamily, we were holding constant at their current rates. Commercial going up 4.5% per year, and large commercial 5.5% per year. The final phase-in strategy down at the bottom is after the adjustments for the physical audit for the billing system. And it kept single family the same, multifamily the same, and then a shift from your commercial up about 1% and large commercial down about 0.5%. So just as a group as a whole, just a couple of about a percentage shift change there. Then looking at the design of the rate structures, kind of recapping what the goals for the study were, and that's to generate an appropriate balance between revenue stability and the ability for your customers to kind of control their water bill by reducing their volume. Your current revenue distribution is about 68% of your revenues are recovered on the fixed cost and 32% on the volume. We put this more in line with kind of industry trends and practices of about 40% recovered from the fixed and 60% to the volume. And again, because of the significant impacts on customer classes for the changes that we're recommending, is we'd be moving towards both your customer class cost of service results and these results for your percentage of fixed versus volume recovery on a phased-in plan. For single-family residential, we would move immediately from the declining block rate structure to a 3-tiered block rate designed to kind of look at low water usage, medium usage, and high usage, and we'd be looking at reducing that current 10 CCF allowance over the 5-year study period. Multifamily commercial, again, reducing the allowance at about 50% over the 5-year period, moving immediately to the class-specific single block rate for multifamily and commercial, and then the large commercial, again, reducing that allowance over the study period, immediately condensing down from 6 blocks down to 2 blocks, more representative of their usage patterns, and then condensing the remaining 2 blocks over the rest of the 5-year study period. So here's the chart again where we're showing this is for the first year of the phase-in, so that's 2014. About 61% of the customers, single-family residential, would be seeing a decrease in their bill, about 30% showing an increase, where that cutoff point is about anyone using 14 or less would see a decrease, and then as you use more, you would have incrementally higher bills. Just for a little bit of information, the majority of your customers are, don't use more than the 25 or 30 CCF column. It's a pretty small percentage that we're getting in that latter block. Is about 5-6% of your customer class getting that higher unit cost for the large volume of user. Then we added another chart here just to give information on the last year of the study period. Since it is a phase-in period, wanted to make sure that you saw the full effects by the end of the study period. And so that would, over time, by the end of the study period, it would be 36% of the bills will have decreased over that study period, with 64% increasing. And that's a result of having the decreases in the rate structure, but then the 3% added annual increases every year. So still over the full 5-year period, about 36% will see lower bills than they do today. Put together a couple charts to try to show the varied differences and what the impacts would be for the other customer classes. Multifamily, again, looking at the first year of their bill impact, is quite a varied pattern on whether you'd see increases or decreases. So this kind of shows from the bottom is the decreases up to the increases. About 63% would see decreases to their bill in the first year, with about 37% seeing an increase. And then again, we looked at this in the last year of the study period, 2018. There would be about 76% would see a decrease and 24% seeing an increase. And looking at the regular commercial in the first year, about 62% seeing a decrease, 38% overall seeing an increase. And then by the end of that study period, 51% seeing a decrease and 49% seeing an increase. We did run sample bills for all of the multifamily and commercial customers, just to make sure that there weren't any other anomalies that we could find in there. And this is how we put together this graph that is pretty varied, other than the single-family residential class, based on their business or their size of the complex as to what their impact would be. Then looking
baked into the final years, you say, is a 3% increase that we're projecting.
for single-family residential, it's a 3%. For multifamily, there would be no increase over the study period, and then 5.5 a year for commercial and 5 for large.
Do we have an idea what the magnitude of the increase is? Is it going to be above that 3% single family?
It's
And for the, I'd be curious if you took out that 3% overall projected increase, what the how many would be seeing an increase at the end of it?
I didn't do the calculation of not having the 3% in there, so I'd have to get back with you on that. But yeah, so we have it with the 3% random.
I'm a little worried of the frog in the pot effect, turning the heat up gradually.
So, no more questions on water. I'm going to skip then back to sewer, where we didn't make any changes since the last time we were here. So just to recap, what that rate strategy was maintaining existing rate structures and applying the proposed utility rate increases across the board to your existing rates. So that was in the last 2 years of the study period, 17 and 18, that you had 2% rate increases, so those would be adjusted to the current rate structure, and then working with city staff to develop kind of a longer-term phase-in strategy to adjust those commercial classes to a more equitable structure. One of the things that we were thinking of is maybe looking at this in 2 steps. First, developing a phase-in strategy that would just move everyone to their cost of service by class, but maintaining that current flat rate structure. And then maybe a second step would be moving that commercial rate structure from all those kind of charge per unit, but on a flat rate basis, to a volume-based basis over time. Perhaps even looking at that in a later rate study, to where the whole phase-in strategy would be revised over 10 years rather than trying to fix it in 5. What we found that there were so many shifts within that flat rate structure that trying to both change the flat rate structure to a volume base and address the cost of service shifts, it was just having really wild variations between classes. So we want to give that a little bit more thought and time to develop an appropriate structure for that. Looking at combined bill impacts, the first chart here shows 10 CCF bi-monthly. This is the current usage allowance, and so it's one that people are used to seeing what the average bill is for here. So we have it for water, sewer, and storm, and then combined. So if you are using 10 CCF per month and having to pay that allowance, it shows the combined bill going from $197.60 to $216.24 over the study period for water, sewer, and storm. And then I looked at a more typical usage pattern for your single-family residential is 1,600 cubic feet per bi-monthly period, and that brings the total water, sewer, storm combined bill from $215.42 to $245.92. I did want to just point out there on the storm that the storm plan officially adopted rates are up through 2015, so those latter years are just planning assumptions of increases for storm. And, may or may not occur in those last couple of years.
Was 16 the crossing point in your
14 was.
I'm sorry?
14 CCF was the crossing point,
Okay.
as who would see. Then just a comparison of some of the neighboring jurisdictions compared to your current single-family rate and the proposed single-family rate for the first year, 2014. And again, 2014 represents the City of Washougal's proposed rates only. The other communities, these are effective as whatever their posted adopted rate structures are at this time. So looking at on a combined bill, this is just looking at water and sewer, 190, 140, and 192, 97 compared to your current. That's just kind of informational purposes. We won't go into these numbers in detail here, but this is just the actual schedule of rates where it shows each year. You can kind of see down at the bottom where you're currently at about 68, 69% fixed cost recovery, and how that phases down to 40% for your fixed charge over the study period by reducing that allowance each year over the study period from 10 CCF down to 5 CCF, and then showing the change in the declining block rate structure, changes to a 3-block rate structure for single family, a class-specific single block for multifamily and commercial and large commercial. You can see it's a little short there on the screen, but it goes from the current 5-block down to 2 blocks, and then over the course of the study gets phased to a single block for that customer as well. And then again, just for informational purposes, this is your current sewer rate structure showing the existing flat rates. Again, these are all flat rates for your customers, and showing that it stays the same up until 2017, 2018, where there's 2% rate increases proposed for each of those 2 years. Your current industrial rates, so some of your monitored industrial customers, are based on a unique formula, and the proposal is that those would be adjusted consistent with the system-wide increase here of 2% in the last 2 years of the study period. So that is kind of the wrap-up of where we are. If there's any questions we need to go back to, I can be happy to answer anything.
So Karen, if you were giving the Reader's Digest version of a low user, medium user, and higher user, where are they going to be at?
A low user is someone who uses kind of their winter period average, and so I think probably the best thing for me to do, I'm going to bring up this one chart here, where I can pull over to it here, give you an idea. Sorry, we'll get there. This chart here, for example, if you're looking at single-family residential, the average winter period bi-monthly period is just under 7 CCF per month, so that would be considered a low water user, someone who doesn't really have a lot of outdoor usage. And then the medium range would be just under 8, and again, this is monthly here, expressed monthly. And then your higher is kind of the summer average, so anything around the 10 is still considered average in the summer, so a high water user might be somewhere around 20. On a bi-monthly period, it's a pretty high water user.
But dollar-wise in combined rates, where would they be at?
Let me flip here to the combined. So what I have here shown is the 10 CCF, so that might be more like average on the combined, including storm, is this one where it's at 197.60 to about 216. And then we've got this combined one for 16 CCF. And I don't have a combined chart that shows all the way out to the 50, but if I showed, if we looked at that chart once more, we can kind of give an idea of how that bill goes up for the single-family residential for water. If we just look at it like here, for example, you can see that about 14, that's where they have the decrease, and then you can see when you get up to about the 25, 30, 35 mark, it starts going up to, you know, over the well over the 150 to 200 range as you use more water usage. Did that provide enough information? We could probably get other, you know, detailed bills.
I think, you know, for single family, the punchline is this chart next year. And in spite of there being a 3% increase in the base rates, the redesign, consistent with the council's direction, indicates that 61% of our water customers will see a decrease in the water component of their bill next year. 39% will see an increase. It will be flat for sewer, so that's still 61% decreasing, and then there's a very small couple dollar increase on storm. So some of those 61%, maybe they become flat because of that extra $2 for the storm or whatever, and maybe some see a $2 increase. And then I think equally telling is the next slide, that after 5 years, even with 3% increases every year to the base rate, the restructuring of the rates, where we go from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7, 6, 5, CCF being the base allowance, and all of that restructuring, and again, following council's direction around low water users having some ability to control what they're charged, and high water users having a pricing signal to look at their water use. Even after 5 years of 3% increases, the redesign still has 36% of our water customers' bills being less in 2018 than they are today on the water side. So I think that dramatically portrays a real shift in policy consistent with your direction for the water utility. Now you combine that with 0, 0, and 0 in sewer, and then 2% and 2% in the last 2 years for sewer, and the final small increases in storm, and there's a significant policy shift in how we're doing our rates, and it's responsive to the council's direction, particularly around the low water users. And I think Karen and listened very well and designed a program that's achieving your goals, but also achieving your goal, which is to have a solid utility system that's on solid financial footing and meeting all of our underwriting requirements, and is positioned to do everything we need to do in our capital plan moving forward. We still have some work to do on the sewer side, as Karen mentioned, and we will be diligent on that right away. It's still within their scope to do that, but we think it's important to get these changes in place. So pending conversation, questions, or comments this evening, our goal is to be back with you at your meeting, at your workshop on the 28th with a draft ordinance that will basically, those last two slides that we looked at, which show, the second to the last slide is the proposed water rates. So that big chart right there is essentially the implementation of everything I was just describing, all of the details for that for the 5-year period. And then the chart after that is the implementing chart for the 0, 0, 0, 2, and 2 for sewer. It looks identical to what's in the code right now, just with those adjustments. So the draft ordinance would put in place these two charts as the new rate structures. It would achieve all of the things that we've talked about. And then you could also expect in that ordinance the reversal on that utility tax fire hydrant thing, where we switched that back to the way it was before, where those utility costs, those fire fighting costs for the water system are included in these rates now, as opposed to being captured through the utility tax.
Then a cut in utility taxes to match that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. It'll go, so before we implemented the Supreme Court decision, whenever it was that we did that, I guess it was when we did this in 2010.
In the last,
July.
yeah.
Yeah, so,
Oh,
so in 2010,
Yep.
in effect in 2011, where, again, it was net neutral to the bill.
right.
On paper, the taxes went up from 10.4 to 20.4, but we took that cost out of the rates, so the rate was unchanged because of the fire thing. Now, It'll go from 20.4 back down to 10.4, but now the cost is right in the rates as opposed to being a transfer from the general fund.
Speaking of utility taxes, last year as a one-year measure to keep the rates from spiking, we put the $500,000 into the, basically credit. I don't know how you would describe it. Is the fact that that's going away, at least I assume that's going away for next year, are people going to be seeing a higher increase than what these rates show because of that?
Well, what we're showing here is reflective of that not being part of it. So on this sample bill, I can see it up here.
Yeah, this one here, the 6038, and again, that's assuming the 10
Right.
CCF.
So at 10 CCF, which is the current base rate, so in 2013, this is that first column of rates where it says existing rates. That is the current rate, notwithstanding the credit. So there is that $14 or so credit that then comes off of that $197.60. But for comparative purposes, we have not shown the one-time credit because it is a one-time credit. So for comparison purposes, the $197.60 is what the current code is for rates, and then the $198.91.
So if we renewed that, not suggesting that, but if we renewed that, it would be someone's bill when they open up their bill would be the 183 next year.
Well, if they were a 10 CCF user, if you renewed that, there is a difference of $1.31 year over year. So it would be 183 and change, which it currently is, plus $1.31.
So, okay. So a typical minimal user is going to open their bill next year. I mean, and they're going to see a $197 bill.
$198.91. If they use 10 CCF,
If they use 10 CCF.
for that billing cycle, they will see $198.91.
And we're dropping to 9 next year.
And then when it goes to 9 in the following year, if they were at 10, it would be $203.51. If it was at 9, it would be something a little bit smaller than that, based upon the usage allowance going down and then the volume charge. All the way down to if you are a 5 CCF user. I think a couple presentations ago we had maybe a 5 CCF bill we showed, and it was very low because we're dropping that base charge all along. And that's why I think at least for me, it's been really helpful, is that one graph that shows the two lines, the existing line and the proposed line, that graph there.
And it does take into account between 2014 and 2028, the shifting of that usage allowance.
Now,
So
this is just water. You have to superimpose over the top of that your sewer and your stormwater charge. But sewer staying the same, storm is a couple dollars year over year. So if you can see the flat line there goes up to 10, and the proposed line goes to 9. Then when you go out to the next chart, which is the 2018 chart, you can see that flat line up to 5. Under the proposed line, that part of the orange line that's below the brown line, before you get to 10, those are all folks that are going to be lower, even after 5 years, than the current rate.
Dave?
Dave, do you have a strategy for getting this information out to the public? You mentioned the charts will be in the resolution, the ordinance. I'd sure like for people to be able to see that. I've been out canvassing the neighborhoods, and in spite of all the efforts we've made to get information out, there's still a perception that there's no information out there. So on this particular issue, do we have a strategy to get this information out?
Once we have final direction from the council, it would be our strategy to get that information out to our users, use our website, make a note on the bill for people to
Potentially
take
even
a look
doing
at
another
it.
mailing,
Yeah.
separate mailing for it.
Right. Right now, our website shows what is in the ordinance for 2014, because that's our current information.
Right.
That would change to this. we have this presentation up on our, well, not this one yet, but we will have this one up on our website.
Do you have any idea how many hits we get on the website?
We know that, but I can't answer off the top of my head. But
I think you'd be better off with an active strategy, like the mailing.
Well, one of the other things that staff are working on, and I know they were meeting last week to go through it as well, part of our software system is actually allowing the public to be able to access what their individual usage is. So it's not taking 10 cc's and guessing, do I really use 10? Do I use anything back and forth? They can look back. If they don't have their bills, they can look back at the historic use and be able to cost that out themselves.
Terrific.
So
But
I'm not sure, from the meeting I was in last week, I'm not sure how far along that is and how quick they're gonna be able to activate that, but.
that will take some time, but Counselor, I think to answer your question, what I envision, these presentations are pretty involved and lengthy.
Yes.
20 slides.
Detailed.
This is our 4th session in workshop, and now we'll have the ordinance. That's a lot of information. We need to produce a kind of a 1-page document similar to what we did in 2010 for the 2011 and so forth, and then similar to what we did earlier this year when the council took the intermediate steps. So I would envision a similar 1-page document that then we would proactively get out. And the question would be, would we go ahead and do a mailer above and beyond what we're normally doing potentially to all of our customers to get that out to them?
Trev,
It's interesting.
when's the
Dave?
water quality report?
Paul? David?
Thank you. It's interesting, the number of people who are technologically savvy and yet very passive. They don't go onto the website. And they'll say, I can't get this information. And so I think it's a good idea to solve that problem over a period of time. But for this particular issue, I like your idea of either putting it in the bill or a mailing.
Yeah, the bill's only gonna be a very short message in there, given what we can do in there. One of the other things that we would have in the mailings as well, Jim Dunn is already working with his staff to put together some workshops and some training on conservation and going through and reducing your water usage so that they can help control their own stuff and go through. So hopefully if we have all of those together at the same time, all of that can go in that same mailing to announce those first sessions for folks.
Great.
When is the water
Morning, Joe.
quality report mailed?
Water
Hey, Joe.
quality reports typically.
Paul, hang on. Folks, this is not gonna work, and Paul, I know you want to ignore me at the moment, but once you're recognized to speak, you can speak. Funny Joe?
Well, I just want to tag on what you just said, because I just wrote the word conserve. People always come to me, you meet them in the store, my coworkers, what are you going to do about my water bill? And it's so good now that we can say, you're going to get to own it. But that message has to be paramount in the conversation to them.
Great.
Well, we want to make sure that they've got good ways in order that they can do that.
Yeah,
And or
well-
if we can tie in with some manufacturers, whatever, on low flow heads, whatever it happened to be, that we can make sure.
Well, and if you would take Bob Freeman and give him a private lesson,
Not me. Paul?
When's the water quality report done?
Consumer confidence is typically routed in July. Paper copy, and there is a little bit of policy initiative around being able to do that electronically instead of stuffing every mailbox.
I was just
And
thinking
utility
that
customer
that would be an ideal thing to piggyback on, but if it's not until July, that won't work.
Right. As far as the conservation, we've also looked at outreach through the schools as far as Washougal School District, being able to do that with the youth program and get those flyers home. It's been pretty successful in the past and other city initiatives as well.
what are you saying? You give flyers out to the kids, they take them home to the parents.
Short presentation, few kits, as far as being able to hand those out, and then just have
Oh,
a
yeah,
general
yeah.
overview that you send home with
I got one
thousands
of
of
those
students in
kits.
the district, basically.
Doesn't matter
Which
what
most
their
of
age
them,
is.
a lot of them are customers. So,
Karen or David, remind me in council, what were our projected 2014 percentage increases, water and sewer?
Higher.
13 and a half, I believe, and 8.
13 and a half on water?
Yeah, and I'd have to get back to totally confirm that. But yeah, I think we moved sewer down to 8%, and water was, I think, 13 and a half.
My
I had
memory
that
is
at
it
the,
was 14 and a half.
yeah, I had it at the town hall, so I'm just trying to dial up that chart if I can find it. You've got that? Go ahead.
I'm fairly certain, well, we met with Pendleton earlier.
Right.
In
Oh.
speaking with utility billing, 11 and 3, there was some intermediate steps that were taken with the capital improvement plan.
Oh, that's right.
And those changes in rolling capital up and down. And so I'm fairly certain what's codified right now is 11 and 3 on the water side of the utility, and then on the sewer side of the utility, 8 and 3 for 14 and 15.
Right.
But originally codified with the built-in escalator was the 13 and a half
Okay.
on water. So there were some intermediate changes there.
Got it, thank you.
Still significantly larger than what's been proposed thus far.
And those were across-the-board increases with no reduction in the base allowance phased in at all, and without a change in this policy that we've been looking at around low water usage and the pricing incentive on high water usage. That's been your direction. It's really the two of those things together. It's, you know, we can talk about the across-the-board increases, but when you change the structure of the rates, the across-the-board is less meaningful than the actual end result. Except for sewer, because sewer is staying the same in terms of its structure, and those are, that message very good, clear zeros for 3 years.
Other questions for Karen or staff? Okay, we're on track to bring this thing back intact and have it before you to do your final, whatever you may wish to do at workshop.
I did have an email from Councilwoman Lindsay this afternoon, regretting that she couldn't be here for this, looking forward to watching the video of your presentation and then any discussion that the council had. She indicated she didn't have any questions right now because I think the presentation's done a good job of presenting the information, but she was interested in what her colleagues thought about this, and I explained that we were bringing the ordinance on the 28th, so I
That's a
told-
draft on the 28th?
A draft, yeah, just in workshop, and then a full-on ordinance on the 4th for your action, November 4th. But I did tell her that I would mention on her behalf that she was very interested in her colleagues' thoughts on whether, you know, this is getting in the direction that you wanted to go, and as we're moving forward, because she's going to be watching the video.
Hey, Joyce.
Okay,
May I-
any last thoughts? Can I, Joe?
I just want to say thank you, Karen. I don't know who I mentioned it to, but last time you were here, I observed you answer questions that I barely understood the question sometimes, and you were right on the answer, and I'm thinking, yay. You know, a woman, obviously you're hired because you're professional, but it's amazing to watch, and I appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent job.
Been a pleasure.
Yes.
Excellent job.
Okay.
Karen, thank you.
Touch base with you guys later?
Yeah.
Okay, and you got everything we need as far as bills?
Yes. Yep, I'll let you know if I need anything else.
Thank you.
Happy driving.
Thank you again, Karen.
Safe travels.
Trevor, let's talk about some budgets.
All right. See if we can pull up the master here. How do you collapse this?
Boy, it is stuffy in here. You gentlemen with your jackets on. You're freezing. Here, you want my sweater? Wow.
All right. Public Works budget. We're ready to fly. So we'll start off with parks and facilities and cemetery, and then get into the enterprise side with the utilities. Obviously, you're familiar with the format, same template that's been used by other departments. So if you have any questions, go ahead and let me know. So parks overall budget for 13, just south of $500,000, $473,000. Lion's share of that is human assets, salaries and benefits. You see some utility costs and some other costs incurred there as far as insurance. Soccer fields at $6,000, that's Angelo Fields off of Main Street. And non-obligatory funds just south of $56,000. So you'll see inside of the just south of $500,000 The non-obligatory is a fairly small chunk, right at 11%. And a portion of those non-obligatory is the operating supplies, which really gets into fuel, small tools, minor equipment, bark dust, materials, three-way, anything that we need as far as plane surfaces, fence repair, all those different items. We do have small contract services on a recurring basis as far as geotech or small services for professional contracts. So you'll see the operating supplies, lion's share, 34,000 of the 56, then smaller pieces with maintenance and repair and contract services. And again, this is for 2013, not what's being proposed for 14. Moving on to the facilities, similar in aggregate as far as the overall budget is the parks, just under 460,000. Again, lion's share of that with human assets with salary and benefits. We do have janitorial contract currently for all of our public facilities short of the fire department. That's a large piece of the professional services, the 75,000. Utilities, insurance, and then at the bottom we've got non-obligatory funds at 136,000. Pie chart illustrating that.
You can, Trevor, you can skip the pie charts. I know we put them in here for
Okay.
illustration, but it's really the stuff you just went through, so.
Yep. Operating supplies, typically we have repair. Obviously City Hall is a little bit different situation right now, but typically small repairs for us. Roof repairs that we're able to do, door repairs, flooring, anything small that we can handle in-house short of using a professional service or general contractor to assist us.
Trevor,
Yeah.
what kinds of intergovernmental taxes do we pay?
Intergovernmental.
Yes,
Um,
last item on the slide.
Here
I've not
comes
seen
Jen.
that one before.
Here comes Jen,
There's
just in
Jen.
time to answer the question.
Sales tax would be there, wouldn't it?
yeah, sales tax would be a portion of it. Inside of the
What's the intergovernmental taxes?
4,000 other.
Bottom.
The bottom, for facilities,
Does your sales tax drop in
Sales
there?
tax.
no, I'll be right back. I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Go ahead.
I should
We'll come
go
back to it.
While we await that, moving into the streets, right around $1 million in aggregate. Again, human assets with salaries and benefits make up a large portion of that. The PUD streetlights, which is under contract with Clark Public Utilities, is right around 160,000 for maintenance and repair as well as light replacement.
Trev, do you want to touch on that, especially for newer council members, to let them know what all is underneath that and what all services we get from CPD or CPU?
Yeah, so with the contract, which is typically right around 160,000, we do have provisions in there if there are specific strikes as far as poles that are hit or outages. But it's basically a full-service contract. We don't have any bucket trucks or anybody certified as far as electrical to be able to go up and do Cobra head retrofits or light bulb replacements. So CPU has had a very favorable contract for us over the last several years. We've looked into that, looked at cost-benefit analysis to see if we could pull that in-house or maybe even partner with a Camas or Vancouver of the world to be able to do that service.
Not even close.
Not even close. So, yeah, CPU is very
I think Vancouver uses it
amenable.
too, doesn't it?
I think Vancouver does. I'm fairly certain Camas does, short of their special events, other lights that they hang and take maintenance and repair on. But they're recurring lights that are physical assets in the system. I'm fairly certain they use CPU as well, since they're just well-versed to be able to provide that service, core competency-wise.
Before you leave that one, how much of that can we expect to be going into roads and streets, directly into roads and streets?
As far as the 1 million, the overarching budget. So the last couple of years, the appropriation has been right around $150,000 for actual preservation, as far as slurry seals and micro seals, and when we're able to do so, some grind inlay or even some chip seal oil mat. And
Based
so
on the
that,
survey that you did, it seems to be working.
Right, we had the overarching assessment from Joel Condor that came in a couple months ago. Gave us the
Yes.
rating system and what it would take to keep that preservation and that scoring in perpetuity. So that's a little bit of an offset conversation around funding the infrastructure as far as surface preservation.
Remind me, at our 150, we don't keep up with it.
Right.
It was a higher number that
We need
actually kept
more.
up.
Right. The 150 that we spend for the actual street maintenance is not in this budget. It's, we spend real estate excise tax dollars for that. The $1 million, which is, includes all of the salaries of the team to the extent.
This is basically overhead.
Yeah, this is the team, the salaries and the benefits for the team, taking care of our street lights, indirect costs, and our.
What are the indirect costs again?
Indirect costs in Fund 101 are all of the administrative support services that the general fund provides for the street fund. We always talk about the general fund and the street fund together, but one is, general fund is Fund 001, street fund is Fund 101. We talk about them together when we talk about what our deficit is in the general and street funds. Because it's a separate fund, the general fund charges the street fund for accounting, payroll, human resources, council, mayor,
Engineering.
all of that stuff.
Before she does it, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Of all the areas that we're dealing with,
My memory is that we used to spend about $300,000 a year on pavement maintenance.
Or more.
Yeah,
Close to
fluctuated based
$500,000
off
at
of
one
REIT
point.
two. Yeah,
I'm sorry?
it fluctuated off of the REIT two proceeds.
And that my memory also is that we needed to be around that 300, 350, 375 to stay in place.
We need an additional $200,000 per year going forward to maintain
Right.
the solid rating that we currently have. If it's the policy direction of the council to keep that rating, that was the result. That was the punchline of our consultant's advice that we have quite a number of newer streets, which is why our rating was as high as it was. So in certain areas, if you remember those maps, we had some colors on the map that were flashing at us that we've got some work to do, but you always look at the system. And so we need to take that 150 to about 350-ish in order to maintain that.
Dave?
of all the areas that we deal in, that one seems to me to cry out for attention and budget more than the others. Because once it starts to go bad, the underlayment starts to go bad on a street or a road, the repair cost skyrockets. If we can keep that from happening.
Right. When, in the council discussion after the presentation, the staff talked about some options that are out there for dedicated funding for that particular program, and I would anticipate coming back to that conversation at some point over the next period of time to try to look at a dedicated, sustainable source of funding beyond the REIT. Continue to use the REIT, but one that's not cyclic, not as cyclic as REIT might be.
Okay. Okay, Joe?
Certain areas have certain kinds of traffic, like around schools, you have a lot of school buses. Impact fees pay for those? Well, let me ask it this way. Do we ever partner with the school to repair roads because of the buses, or trucking companies or anything?
Not unless
Go
they're
directly
building a
in.
new facility.
Just at the beginning, yeah.
And actually, if you get down to it, the city of Washougal, if the school district were to build a new office, if the school district was to build a new school today, we would charge them full impact fees, traffic impact fees. The city of Camas charges 0 traffic impact fees for those because of the way that they calculate them. They use peak hour loading, traffic counts, that type of stuff, and the schools don't fall into their peak hours. So they get charged 0 for those.
Interesting.
So,
There are some states that have a street utility as an option, And all of our constituencies would be a customer of the street utility. That's not a tool that's available in Washington, but it's like a water utility or a sewer utility. The school district pays for water and pays for sewer services. And maybe indirectly, because their quality, they help us have a community that can support its streets, because we have a good school district. But in other states, there's a more, that type of a tool. In this state, there are some very limited tools around benefit districts and things like that. But they probably wouldn't end up with a bill to the school district for streets.
Their governmental taxes.
It was 775 budgeted in 12. There was no actual in 11, and we removed it in 14.
But do we know what it would have been?
No,
Okay.
because I didn't go back any further than 11 in the system. So.
What is it?
I don't know,
That
and
was
we
it.
didn't spend anything in 12 out of that line item, but we'd done the 13 budget based off the 12 actual, or budget at the time, and in 14, we've taken the line item out, because it hasn't been used. So I don't know what it was for, but it was $775.
That sounds close to the
Somebody's not
leasehold
playing
excise.
nicely in the sandbox.
For facilities, though, that, the,
We wouldn't
Who
pay
owns
that.
that?
We wouldn't pay it, we
wouldn't
get the
pay
revenue.
leasehold excise
No, but
tax.
who, if we own a property that we rent out, is that in facilities budget or not?
It's certainly not an expense, so.
But the leasehold excise tax is.
It wouldn't apply to us though, because we don't.
I think we pay, it does, because we lease the property up on Mount Norway on the Lear station, so we have to report that as
It doesn't apply to us though, as we're a public entity, we're not subject to.
well, it's the tax on the property, like we get from the port buildings, because we get excise tax on that. So I think we pay that directly out of the 401 budget, because it's a water sewer facility, not out of the facility general fund.
I think we spent enough time on the $775.
Yeah. Cemeteries. Any other questions on streets?
Thank you.
Street.
Just a curiosity, the cost of the flower baskets in downtown, what budget does that go into?
It comes out of the parks budget, which is also general fund side, obviously. Yep. Operating supplies and a portion of maintenance and repair. Cemetery, 138,000, and a large portion of that is human assets with salaries and benefits. The utilities, a large portion of that is from irrigation, not only for curb appeal, but also for ease of digging as far as actually doing the conventional berries there. Insurance, debt payment, I assume that's perpetual care fund, debt payment, and then non-obligatory at 53,000. Pie chart, machinery and equipment. For 2013, it was approved to install, I believe, 3 additional niche walls. Those have been market trending, selling a lot more than conventional berries. We're running out of inventory, so those have been, the pads have been installed, and the actual niche walls will be installed within the next, I think, 4 to 6 weeks.
Is that like a columbarium?
Yeah.
I think?
Yep.
What did you ask, Brent?
Is that like a columbarium, basically where you put cremated remains?
Engineering, again, with the human assets, salaries and benefits, insurance portion, and the non-obligatory portion of the pie. So you'll see with professional services, some other as far as training and travel, attaining CEUs and keeping certifications and endorsements up, operating supplies and communication. And this is broken out partially for community development with Mitch and his staff as far as development review, as we have submittals from the private sector for consideration.
When we provide engineering services to some of the other departments, we roll revenue back into the engineering, we charge those departments, correct? If we do engineering for water, then there's a intergovernmental transfer for that?
Yeah, the engineering program is cost allocated according to a cost allocation formula. So Rob's time and the professional services, there's a percentage, just like the admin folks are. I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's a function of different bases. So there is cost. Some of these, they're funded in the general fund, but they're cost allocated.
Rob is actually broken out between the various funds. So this just is his general fund portion, and then part of his salary is direct allocated to the utilities funds. So then Dave is correct, because I just wanted you to know that this wasn't his total salary, because then the construction engineer is also part of that dollar amount too, in the salaries. So their general fund portion is allocated out in the cost allocation plan.
Thank you.
Okay, for the water sewer, the enterprise side, overall budget just north of 6 million. See salary and benefits there, the human asset portion, debt payments, utility taxes, which will be offset from revenue, indirects, excise, all the usual suspects there, operating permits from the Department of Ecology as well as the Department of Health as water purveyors and treating waste before discharging to the Columbia River. Non-obligatory funds, you see a portion here within the professional services. This relates back to what Paul was just referencing as far as the actual professional services and engineering firms that are leveraged to assist us with facility planning and master planning, as well as other projects that we take on inside the utilities. The repairs and maintenance, this is the operation and maintenance side as far as wellheads, taking care of reservoirs, painting the coatings on the exterior and interior, pump rebuilds, all those things that come up on a recurring basis on an annual basis. Supplies and tools, a large portion of that is chemicals for our water system plan, or our disinfection system, which is sodium hydroxide and sodium hypochlorite to be able to treat the drinking water, and communication and travel as well. You see it broke out and illustrated in the pie chart. And stormwater, which was originally created in 2007, operating budget just under 1.3 million. Salaries and benefits. Last year there was some pipe collapsing in the Sunset Ridge subdivision. There was an emergency repair made, some cast in place, and some open excavation repairs we needed to do there for make sure we didn't have the road be compromised. Indirect charges and debt payments. I believe the debt payments are in regards to the J Street culverts that were constructed within the last 16 months next to the high school and Orchard Hills Golf Club. You see the non-obligatory funds towards the bottom. Pie chart illustrating thus.
Okay, Joe?
That big rain we just had, I live just up on above J Street, and I use J Street every day. In the dark, in the morning, there was still a giant puddle. It was all the way out to the center of the road. The stream flowed well, but I don't know where that came from. It's too dark for me to tell. By the time I went back in daylight, it was gone. So I don't know if anybody, we were talking about sandbagging, all that was prepared just in case. I don't know if anybody got up to and got to observe that.
That's the first intersection on J, east of the high school there, 39th.
Well, just as you, the four-way stop, and then you go east, what is the first street there from?
I think it's 41st.
41st?
Yeah.
So it's between that.
It's a low
I don't
spot.
know, you may not have come down
There's a low
that
spot
early.
right there.
Low spot. Oh, it was deep, and I didn't see it. And it splashed. I drove a big old Suburban, and it just covered my whole car. Freaked me out. Reminded me, oh, that's right. There's a puddle there. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Okay.
So you could keep an eye out.
We'll take a look
See
at
how
it. We might have
it's-
had
See how it's functioning.
surcharged catch basins or something that was maybe compromised there with all the debris and heavy rain. We'll take a look. Okay, similar to the water and sewer, professional services, design and environmental support as far as the stormwater utility with the CIP, tracking with the capital improvement plan. Supplies and tools is 72,000 rather than 7,200. Operating leases, occasionally we'll rent or lease equipment, larger equipment that we need to do a specific project. Obviously, where you can't justify purchasing equipment, we lease it to be able to get the job done. Travel and training. So the highlights really for 2014 is status quo, if you will, as far as operation and maintenance, tracking with our capital improvement plan and continuing our level of service and looking for efficiency opportunities across all divisions and departments, not just the enterprise side and the utilities, but also with the parks, facilities, and cemetery and streets. Any questions?
What's our next move on the streets with the gentleman that did the survey?
Mr. Condor? Yeah, so there was some different options or level of service alternatives. The funding that directly correlated to keeping that specific score and how that score dwindles over time. The breaking point that Councilmember Shoemaker talked about where it depreciates out and really doesn't make sense to do a full reconstruct, looking at preservation and some other opportunities to take care of the surface streets. Depending on the schedule as far as council in late October, November, and budget season, I can discuss that with Mr. Condor based on his availability to be able to bring that back.
Yeah, I think the direction that I recall from the council was that you were interested in having a conversation at some point, but my sense was late this year or early next year about what it might look like, talking to the community about that $200,000 and whether we should do something along those lines to address that need, see if there'd be support in the community to do that. So we haven't designed it really for the next couple of months in our workshopping schedule. Really was targeting probably first part of next year and moving into that time frame. I don't know if we need him back. I think his results were pretty straightforward,
Right.
and it's really more of a financial question, not so much a technical question. But if it would be helpful, we could certainly have him back as a refresher.
Jennifer?
Yep. I'm definitely fine with waiting a bit until we get through this budget cycle. I think from what I recall regarding this presentation, aren't we in the 80% range?
Right around 84, 85.
That's 'cause
David
of the
mentioned earlier around having
building.
a few streets that are at early in their service life, with E Street and a full reconstruct out there, which was a very good treatment for that major arterial. There's other components that are fairly new as far as hot mix aggregate asphalt roads. So as those start to depreciate out, that score dwindles pretty rapidly.
Right.
So there was some recommendations, I think maybe 3 different options to look at as far as funding and what type of treatments you could look at to try to achieve that score or not have it slide too much into the near future.
I think we have time to ponder that between now and next season's effort. And, ideally, if we were going to do something more, we might talk to the community about that the first part of the year. Just depending on how things go, when funds are available. I mean, there's a lot of different options that are available to the council, but I think that conversation can happen at the first part of next year. And, if we missed a season and stayed status quo for a season, I don't think it blows the long-term viability out of the water. I think that we can be deliberative about that. And
What
that
do
would
you
be
see
okay.
as the beginning of the season? May, June?
We start doing the work in late summer.
Weather
Late?
pending, yeah, we can
Late
get out and
summer.
Late
start
summer, right.
Oh,
crack sealing and chip sealing, yeah, midsummer at the earliest, depending on what type of season we have.
You also have options on some of those if you look towards car tabs and that type of thing to be tied directly back to road maintenance and additional road maintenance. There's, Jennifer, remind me, a 6-month lag time in those,
I think it was 6 months.
but you certainly would have the ability to go against reserves for that if we absolutely wanted to get them in and start programming the work for 2014 and pay those back through those car tabs coming back into the reserve so that you don't miss an additional season in there. The amount of dollars is $200,000 a year, well, right about the $200,000 a year,
Right.
190, somewhere in there. Just on that one example, so. Any other questions for Trevor? Jennifer, other general funds?
Tiny.
Yes. So this is kind of the wrap-up remaining items in the general fund that we haven't talked about yet. Economic development, general legal, general government, and intergovernmental. The overall budget for economic development in 13 is $55,000. $50,000 of that goes to the Camas-Washougal Economic Development Authority, or CWEDA, and then the additional 5 goes to Columbia River Economic Development Council. The general legal budget is $60,000. The actual monthly retainer amounts to $38,400, and then the additional is for the other duties as assigned.
The annual retainer?
Well, it's monthly, right, that we pay, then it adds up to an annual amount.
What do
We're
we
not
get
giving
for,
them
what do we, no, you'd expect me to ask a question about this. What do we get for that 38.4?
What's in the basic scope of
Yeah,
services?
do we, that's just not a, we get service out of that.
We get a basic scope of services for that. Support of our council meetings, ordinances, resolutions, and some other routine stuff. And then to keep that number down, that scope is fairly limited. And then we pay as we go, and we leverage MRSC quite a bit.
Okay.
We also use other folks for legal services. This
I
isn't
know
all
about
going
that,
to
yeah.
English and Lane.
I just made a delivery for her.
And I want to make sure I get this right, so I'll do it as a question, Jen. This is not the entirety of our expenditures. Embedded within each department are some legal expenditures.
Correct. So when we get the monthly bill for the additional services, it's broken out by department, and each department head authorizes within their budget additional professional service costs.
Indigent defense is in which budget?
The court. So this doesn't have any of Scott's charges in it.
Right.
Those all go to the court. The general government is kind of the catch-all for all of the transfers, and IT services used to be in 2013 in this area, and 14 again it'll be in the finance department. So our budgeted transfers to the street and cemetery fund were at $585,000 for streets and $72,000 for cemetery. The utility assistance fund, the additional assistance for individual bills to bring the utility bills down was the $500,000 transfer. The ER&R transfers, and then the support of the building and transportation capital accounts. The state audit costs go here, citywide communications, just kind of the overall overarching apply to the whole city is where this goes, and then gets allocated out. Intergovernmental is 16.5. Social services to the Children's Home Society is $7,500 of that. Community recreation goes to the school district for their community recreation program of $5,000. And then the one that's mandatory is the Clark County Alcoholism Program. We get billed from the county dependent upon, I believe it's alcohol sales in our taxing authority.
Washougal nonprofits, or nonprofits that the city supports, are these the only ones, or are there others? I remember there was a list of nonprofits last year that I had wanted to ask, like,
These are the only organizations that's received direct financial support. Is the Children's Home Society, and then the community ed is the school district's ancillary arm that provides the community ed. We don't have a recreation program. Many communities have a parks and recreation program. We really only have a parks program. So we make a modest contribution to the community recreation program so that we can have some sense of community recreation, but we don't provide it directly. The last item there is mandatory.
I heard that. That's interesting.
And the other one that we have is for the Humane Society for their services for the shelters.
That's a professional services agreement. They happen to be a nonprofit.
It's another
service provider, but they're not, they're providing
We pay them a fee for service
a
base.
fee for service. The
Right.
payment to the social services group is allowed, it's not a gift of public funds, it's allowed under the state constitution to support the poor and infirmed. So we make that, and then we also receive services from community ed. They're providing recreation services.
I was wondering just how, or my note here from a year ago almost, who and why do you qualify? Who and how do you qualify to be included in those gifts, if that's what they are?
I mean, to receive an appropriation from
Yeah.
the city. There really isn't a process for that. We've had a relationship for years with the Children's Home Society across the street. Did a grant, got the CDBG grant to upgrade that facility for them, and so that we could have those services for our constituents provided by that nonprofit consortium. But beyond, and then we do the recreation program because we don't have a recreation program. But beyond that, we really don't have any proactive programmatic support of not-for-profits in the community.
So there are nonprofit organizations that come to the city and say, we would like to be considered. You haven't had that experience?
No, and but we haven't asked them to come either.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Children's Home Society one has been something that's my understanding, has been around for quite some time, before my time, and it's something that we've continued. We've reduced it fairly significantly, but
Less than
we do
half
not.
of what it used to be.
Yeah, we do not. It is
It's county funded?
nope. That comes out of our general funds.
No, I mean, there are other funds.
Oh,
They certainly don't function on 7,500.
No. There are, in fact, someone representing that organization will be here a little bit later in the year to talk to us. I think that they share with us a little bit about, but we can make sure that they share with us a little bit about their overall revenue portfolio. I'm sure they receive funds from a wide variety of sources.
Mhm.
This is probably a small piece of their overall. And some of it might come through programs that are administered by the county. A lot of federal dollars flow through the state and then to the county.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that last one is a mandatory program
yeah.
that we have to be part of.
Jennifer?
Yes, actually, the school district, in informal conversations with me, would love for us to take over the rec program. They're actually looking to eliminate their involvement with it, other than facilities. So
So they want to get out of the community education.
they would like to, the community ed,
Oh, the adult? Oh, yeah, I
Yes.
know what you're talking about now.
for all age levels.
A little pamphlet with all the fun.
Yes, well, I think that Camas has a Parks and Rec.
They have parks
Department,
rec,
and they
that's
do
right.
their
Vancouver.
And
Community ed.
community education.
Yep, they do.
Right.
So it's not inconceivable for a city to run that and take it over and do it.
Right.
So
I-
That's
Do you have
just
a
an
timeframe that they're
FYI.
looking at?
I do not. It was an informal conversation, but I was obligated to bring it back to the council for consideration at some point. So it
Thank
seems
you.
like a good enough time.
Yeah.
FYI.
Meeting with the superintendent and part of her team later this week, Sean and I believe Trevor. So we'll try to remember to bring that up. Because
Great.
I don't recall hearing that the last time we met, but we were talking about a number of other things with them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
David Tudor is the person I spoke to, so you might want to mention that.
okay, we will. Thank you for the heads up.
The 2014 highlights for these other funds, again, the IT services will be pulled out of the general fund part and is embedded into the finance department now. And then the rest of the services will remain at the same levels. And that's it. Questions?
Questions for Jen?
I just wanted to say I'm glad to see IT move into finance because there's good management in finance and it lets IT do IT instead of trying to manage a department.
So this presentation, these were the last two in this program that we had developed to help our review of the 2014 proposed budget, was to look at, in some level of detail, the 2013 budget for each of the departments, and then at the end of the presentations for each of the departments, talk about what the highlights will be. And so what you can expect actually later this evening, we are have some budget presentations, talk about the revenue and expenditure estimates for 2014, and then the overall highlights of the 2014 budget, which are reflective of all the incremental pieces we've been doing over the last several weeks in these workshops. And I think the bottom line is that with some minor adjustments back and forth between some of these line items that we were describing in each of the groups, the 2014 budget is pretty much the same as the 2013 budget. And so that's why the going through the 2013 budget we thought would be helpful with these slides. And then with the other tools that Jennifer provided earlier in the year, the budget guide document about explaining all the funds and the different line items, you take all of those together, hopefully it will be helpful as you review the 2014. And when we convene at 7 o'clock, Jen has two budget presentations to go through, the revenue and expenditure one that was provided at your last meeting. She'll go over it, and then highlights for the 2014 budget, including the capital highlights that we have. And then she'll also talk about the
Next steps.
schedule and the next steps for the budget moving through October and into November.
Okay.
Any other questions for Jennifer? Thank you. Back to public comments. Larry, Earl, anything from the two of you? Okay, I've got nothing for you at this point. Any items from council?
No, sir.
Okay, hearing none, we are adjourned until 7 o'clock. Thank you.